Here at Education on Fire, we're combining some of the wisdom, knowledge and resources we're sharing on the podcast and want to create a book to gift to the children in our lives. To find out more, go to educationonfire.com/book. You can donate, share and make this a reality. That's educationonfire.com/book. Hello, my name is Mark Taylor and welcome to the Education on Fire podcast. The place for creative and inspiring learning from around the world. Listen to teachers, parents and mentors share how they are supporting children to live their best authentic life and are proving to be a guiding light to us all. Hello and welcome back to the Education on Fire podcast. I wanted to have a conversation today about exactly what is possible through the pandemic in terms of education and parents and how we can support our children. We know that the system is really struggling in terms of schools being open in some places, schools being closed, a combination of remote learning and face-to-face teaching. It really is a tricky time to know what to do, both in terms of being teachers and schools and also as parents. And today I'm going to be chatting to Jen Lumanlan, and she is the creator and the host of the podcast Your Parenting Mojo. And she was a guest on episode 68. So if you'd like to go back and listen to that, you'll find out much more about exactly what she does on her podcast and how she can help and support you. But today specifically, we're going to be talking about the relationship of the pandemic in terms of what's going on in the US as well as here in the UK. And most importantly, we're going to be discussing the pandemic pod, explaining a little bit about what that is and how you can utilise whatever version of that is possible for you in your community in terms of supporting your children in their education, whether that's forming clusters of families to educate, whether it involves hiring a tutor, caregiving, maybe in terms of being able to support swapping childcare, whether it's hiring an online tutor or children being able to have a small cluster of people working together. So we really hope that we're going to have some great advice for you in terms of what these pods are from Your Parenting Mojo. Hi Jen, welcome back to the Education on Fire podcast. I'm excited to be talking about pandemic pods, and I think as we start to go into the winter here in 2020, there's going to be more and more people worrying about how education is going to be in school and out of school. So this is going to be a really important conversation. So yeah, hello again.
Hello, thanks for having me back. Yeah, I think being in the US, we're maybe going to be able to give you a bit of a taste of the future.
Yes, that may well be the case. I mean, I've already been seeing people's experiences of schools opening and closing and nearly going back and then not going back. I mean, we're in a bit of a different situation here in the UK in as much as we were completely closed from March through into September, which is when the autumn term would normally start here. And they've gone back and they're pretty much in bubbles. So they're sort of either in whole year group bubbles or around key stage bubbles here. And that seems to be working in lots of ways. But I think one of the things that people are starting to realise is that they can't send entire bubbles home if someone is tested positive. So they're then keeping it within people who've had really close contact and all of those things. And I think that seems to be working to some extent, but we're still not in a great position from a testing point of view. So it's that unknown in people having to self-isolate just in case, which is causing a little bit of chaos. And certainly from our experience, it seems to be that when the children were remote sort of Zoom learning over the summer, while it wasn't perfect, it was quite stable because you went online, you found your work, teachers were available on email and stuff at the same sort of time. But it kind of was what it was, and it kind of got into a routine. And I think because so many teachers are in school now, obviously teaching face-to-face, for those that do have to self-isolate, it's a little bit kind of left to one side. And so that's a bit of a mishmash. And I think that might be a bit of a struggle as we get further and further into the winter. But yeah, I'd be very interested to hear exactly your experiences from being in the US.
Yeah, and obviously the US is a big place and every state has its own rules about who's going back and when and how and all the rest of it. I'm on my way to New Jersey, actually in COVID quarantine right now in a house in rural Pennsylvania. But we're going to visit my in-laws and one of my husband's childhood friends is a teacher, a high school teacher, and he is teaching to half the class in person in a classroom, behind a shower curtain, I think, essentially, and being broadcast on Zoom at the same time to the other half of the class. And so they are doing some kind of half and half schedule where they're switching. Where I'm coming from in California, they are basically in several of the biggest school districts. They're not planning on going back anytime soon. I mean, I think they're saying that there is a small possibility in some places, if certain criteria are met, that they could go back. But by and large, the picture seems to be that we're going to be learning remotely for the foreseeable future. We definitely went through it in the spring as well. And it was incredibly difficult for a lot of families, and also for teachers as well, who I think we have to acknowledge are really caught in the middle here. I mean, teachers know that being in Zoom school for 6 hours a day is not how a young child learns best. But they're sort of caught between state mandates on number of contact hours and the school district's plans, and some parents who are saying, I need to work. You got to keep my kid busy for 6 hours. And other parents who are saying, my kid can't concentrate for more than 30 minutes at a time. So what do you want me to do during 6 hours? And so many different conflicting voices. And so we're seeing a lot of different arrangements play out in a lot of different areas.
I think the thing that strikes me, and the more I have these conversations, and the more I remember, like that spring summer situation, and even in the middle of everything now, is the fact that how rigid everything is. It's kind of like what needs to happen in the world before everyone can just let go and say, hang on a minute. What do I need now? And I think what you explained there is absolutely perfect, because it's kind of, some children have parents that are working. Some of them are working from home. Some of them have good access to the internet. Some of them don't. Some of them thrive in some situations and not others. And it's like, surely there needs to be some kind of thought process that says it needs to be a little bit more individualized.
Ideally, yes. And I hope I wasn't painting too rosy of a picture here, because I think there are a lot of parents who wouldn't see it in that way. And when I say there are a lot of different arrangements going on, it tends to be across school districts. Within a school district, and this isn't universally the case, but it's often, within a school district, we're doing it this way, and you need to do it this way. We're actually homeschooling, but my neighbors are involved in their local public school, and they said that if their children are not online by 10 o'clock in the morning participating in their Zoom class, then they get marked tardy. And if you get 3 tardy marks, then you're going to need to account for truancy. And my neighbors are, they're white presenting and clearly very involved in their child's education. We're in a fairly affluent area, and so this is probably not going to be a big deal. But you're absolutely right that not everybody has a good access to the internet connection, to access to equipment, and there are parents who are being taken to court for their children's absence in school because they lack the equipment that they need to engage in school in the way that the school district is demanding. So yes, we're seeing some flexibility, and the districts that are doing well are the ones that have that flexibility, that say, you know what, if your child needs more support, we are here. If your child wants to complete the assignments by themselves with you during the day, whenever it happens, and you just want to send a photograph of it when it's done, that works too. And so those are the parents that I'm seeing that they're like, thank goodness, this is actually working for us.
And I think the distinction between the age of the children is really important, isn't it? I mean, I was very grateful because our youngest is just turned 13 over the summer, so she was 12 in that summer, last sort of summer term. But because they're in that sort of secondary system here in the UK, they're used to being independent. They're used to just getting on and doing the work. And plus the fact that a lot of what they do is actually beyond me already. So I wouldn't have been that much help to begin with. But they're kind of self-sufficient, which, there was a lot of organising in terms of timetabling and scheduling, in terms of just, our computer access and where you were going to be in the house and all of that kind of stuff. But once we kind of got that together, it kind of ran relatively smoothly. But I can imagine if your children are younger in sort of that sort of kindergarten up through K to sort of 7 or 8, I would imagine, and certainly here in primary school, then that's a very different way of being.
Yeah, and those are primarily the parents that I work with. I tend to work with parents who are in the preschool, kindergarten, elementary school, primary school years, and they're trying to figure out. Okay, so, I'm hearing reports of a child who needs to be held on the parent's lap to be able to focus for Zoom kindergarten, as it were. I've seen pictures of kids asleep. There was one that I saw but the kid had the headphones on. He's sitting in front of a laptop. He's visibly asleep, and the picture is being shot from the side, and so to the child's other side is a schedule that has him back to back for in classes from 8 to 2:30 with an hour off for lunch. I mean, I couldn't do that as an adult
Mm.
with a fully developed prefrontal cortex and the ability to postpone needs that I have related to food and the bathroom and that kind of thing. How we're expecting young children to be able to focus in that way for that period of time. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling.
And take us through your understanding of of Zoom school, and like you say, they wanted to interact, they wanted it to still be school in whatever way it could, but I mean,
Mhm.
there seems to be probably more negative connotations than positive ones in terms of that interaction even.
There can be, because Zoom is very hard for us to use for a number of reasons. So when you're looking at somebody else on a Zoom call, particularly when you're looking at a sea of 25 faces, and one of them's the teacher, firstly you need to focus on, okay, which one's the teacher? That picture, unless you take it out of gallery view and onto speaker view, is going to be very tiny. It's hard to see any kind of expression at all, never mind micro expression. So we turn off the gallery, we put it on speaker view. We have to be continually focused on that person to be able to understand the micro expressions that they're using, that our brains rely on to be able to process the information this person is sending to us. And so that's much easier for us to do in person. It takes a lot more capacity and energy to do that through an online platform. And so when we're being asked to do this for many, many hours a day, that's very difficult. Some children find it really hard to not focus on themselves. They spend the whole time watching their own picture on the call. So there's a setting where you can turn that off if you need to. In a classroom environment, the teacher can kind of get a sense for whether the class is getting it. Like, is this idea landing, or do we need to go through it again, and I need to explain it in a different way? On Zoom, everybody just kind of stares at the teacher blankly, and the teacher doesn't really know if anybody understands it. So we have to do polling and that kind of thing. Well, can the child work the buttons? Can they take themselves off mute by themselves? Can they respond to a poll? And so there's all these issues that kind of mount up on top of each other that make it an incredibly difficult experience, even on top of the regular school issues, like the fact that if we think about self-determination theory, we all have this need for competence and autonomy and connectedness, and school doesn't really give us the opportunity to choose what we want to do. There's no choice, basically, because it's chosen for us. So, doubly so with Zoom school. Connectedness can be there with a good teacher in an in-person school, way harder in Zoom school. And so we have all of that working against us as well, on top of the actual problems with the platform itself.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I noticed was it was very, very core subject led. I think, when they stripped away everything that needed to be done, and those are the things that came flying through.
Yeah. I heard one child say, "This is everything I hate about school and nothing I like about it."
Yes, yeah. What I did enjoy watching though was the way that I saw our children adapt. I mean, I'm not a massive kind of social media fan for our kids and the amount of time and all of that kind of thing, but what was amazing was the fact that they did have a bit of their own personal class setting, because they had, there was sort of 3 or 4 people that were hanging out during the day, working together and collaborating and sort of finding their best way to go. And I thought actually that seemed to work quite well, because they still had that connectivity, albeit online, but in a slightly more social way, which they would have obviously if they were sort of hanging around school as well as being in the class. And I thought, thank goodness in some ways that some of those things were actually a positive for a change.
Yeah, for sure. And where the school and the teacher and the district are able to support putting those things in place, that has been incredibly supportive to some parents, just to have a place where a child can go and hang out with their peers and not even necessarily be taught during that time, but just to spend time working together on and focusing on something. And where districts have been able to put those things in place for children who want them and need them and use them, that's awesome. But it definitely hasn't been the case that they are available to everybody who needs them, and there definitely has been a lot of structure that some children are struggling with as well.
Yeah, and I think also one of the things that we noticed was the fact that let's just do what we can do, as a family, especially in lockdown. We were very insular because you could literally go out for your hour's exercise, or one of us was able to go shopping, or whatever it happened to be. So once we were able to get out and the restrictions released a little bit, we found that we had a bit more time and a bit more connectivity within the family unit, which was really nice. So for example, a couple of mornings preschool, I was going out playing tennis with my daughter, and we got a table tennis table that just enabled us just to have a bit of time out and to do those sorts of things, which actually we wouldn't normally have had. So we tried to really sort of put a spin on the positive sides of things, albeit in a very strange situation.
Yeah, and what I see in the parenting forums is there's sort of a split between parents who have really been able to do that and are almost looking at how life used to be and how life might be again and thinking, wait, why were we doing that?
Absolutely.
Because this slowed down version of life is actually really kind of cool. And then there are other parents often who are still having to work outside the home. I mean, often teachers, frankly, right, who need to be either in classes or online for many hours a day, who don't have childcare support for themselves, or other parents who are working in professions where you have to work outside and childcare is closed, and who are just feeling run ragged and as though this cannot continue for very much longer. So and of course there are people in the middle as well who are sort of trying to make the best of it and are feeling tripped up and like things keep popping up. There keep being more things, and we think we're going back, and then no, we're not. We think things are opening up. Oh no, they're not. And so there's definitely that kind of struggle in the middle as well.
Yeah, and I think certainly in the UK here, because we kind of all went back en masse, September's arrived, right, we're back to school. That kind of gear shift. I mean, it's usually bad enough having had sort of 6 or 7 weeks off getting, back into the school journey. But with the added pressure of kind of everyone apparently is now massively behind in their learning, which I just find unbelievable, bearing in mind we've been through going through a global pandemic and we are where we are. That just is a baseline. But that kind of sense of sort of catching up, but also the sense of having had that, like, say, laid back kind of feel within life to some extent, as the club started coming back, as well as the school and more work and this and that, it really was that kind of, I hadn't quite realised, well, I think I did know before, but I really know now just how busy and chaotic life can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that whole notion of being behind, I mean, in learning, it makes me, I don't know, sad, I guess, that something as important and profound as our children's learning is reduced to their performance on a standardized test that can be compared with children who are tested in other countries. And if they're not testing at a certain level, then they are behind in some way, when actually what your child learned from playing tennis with you and deepening their connection with you in that time, even though it cannot be tested or necessarily even measured, is probably so much more profound than and everything else that was going on in your family as well, not just that by itself, but the whole way that you approached that period of time with them probably taught them so much about how they want to be in the world. How do I want to experience this life? What is really important to me? But because they weren't focusing on writing standards and doing certain problems in math, they are now, I'm doing heavy air quotes, behind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the experience part was the important thing there, and I think how they felt, I think, was that. And I think we had lots of those conversations about all of the things we've been talking about so far, and I think understanding how you feel and they feel about this and pulling all of that together it's been really interesting, and I hope well, certainly from our family's point of view, see it as a positive, and also then can put things in place very much more as we get back into whatever this new normal is or how it's going to change. Because I think to have that self-awareness of actually, I'm not going to sweat this stuff, I'm not going to buy into this, I mean, I have to, well, they have to be in school at the moment, in as much as that's where their life is heading, even though there may be some parents who decided to do it differently. But how they take that experience and how they engage in it, and what they're prepared to sacrifice for that, I think really changes, and I think that's probably been the biggest learning curve for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So let's talk about the fact that, like you say, you're in that position of in school, out of school. We're in school at the moment, but I suspect that maybe that won't be quite as straightforward or as it is at the moment as we start to get further into winter and even into the new year. So tell us what pandemic pods are. Tell us what that version is. Tell us what it is that we can do to help ourselves should we end up in a chaotic situation where we just don't know what to do, but we want to do something.
Yeah, it was so interesting to watch that whole thing happen. Pandemic pods kind of exploded onto the consciousness of parents here in the US. I think it was in late August, and it happened in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, I think first, where I was living at the time, and then sort of bi-coastal, and then filled in from there. And it's basically the idea that we're going to take a small group of children who are going to be learning together in some format, and I'll talk about the different formats, in an environment that isn't in their school, with a view to limiting our COVID exposure by not having the children in contact with as many people at one time. And so we've seen a variety of arrangements, from it being something that's very much parent driven. We could rotate the parents through, or we could have one parent responsible for the whole thing. We could hire a college student who isn't in college because college is closed, or a recent graduate, or a grandparent, or even a teacher or a tutor, to help the children to fulfill all of the requirements that they would be doing in school, and a completely school set curriculum. Or there is sort of this, in some districts, it's possible to kind of send the school an email and say, you know, our family's really overwhelmed right now, and we're here, but we're not able to engage in online learning at the moment. It's not possible everywhere, but it is possible some places. And to be able to kind of take back a little bit of control over what the children are doing, all the way through to potentially just saying, you know what, we're gonna experiment right now with some interest-led learning, and really follow our children's interests in terms of what they want to learn, and learn all of the other subjects through our children's interest. So that's kind of the basic formation. And there has certainly been a lot of talk about the equity issues in pandemic pods, which I think rightly deserves a lot of consideration, because it does have the potential for white parents to continue the privilege that a lot of them have by having more resources, pulling your child out, being able to hire a tutor. You come back in a year and it's like nothing happened. Whereas for people who don't have access to the same resources, the picture may be very different. And so I actually set up a course to help parents form pandemic pods with social justice issues kind of baked in from the very beginning, so that we're not just ignoring those issues. We're also not kind of reserving one spot for a person who doesn't look like us to sprinkle a bit of diversity on the top. But we're really taking these issues that, I mean, if we're at a Black Lives Matter protest, if we're saying that Black Lives Matter to us, then we're taking these principles and saying, okay, we need to form our pod so that it is inclusive of all people, and potentially even goes beyond school as an equalizer in terms of giving all children the opportunity to succeed in learning.
And it sounds to me like it's a really good way of learning, pandemic or not. You know, I mean, child interest led learning is just like, absolutely,
yeah.
Let's do it. You know, why not anyway? But I think, I guess it kind of opens that door, and the question to kind of, you know, do you think it is a way of the education? I keep talking about the education system changing. I just think all that's much harder to do. But in terms of actually, if we're having to make different choices and educate, stroke school, stroke help our children learn in a different way, once we realise that it's possible and it works and it can be very creative and something which is very supportive for our children, do you see that sort of becoming a way that more and more people will adopt? Because I guess the processes in that system will be in place because we would have been doing it because we would have had to have been.
Well, you're talking about my hopes and dreams now. Yeah, I mean, I hope that we can make some shifts coming out of this. I mean, my personal opinion is that we're kind of in this a liminal space right now as a society, where we're in a transition period. There's a lot in flux, and it feels very uncomfortable. And our instinct is to go back to the thing that we know. Like, how can we make everything like it was before? Because I mean, yeah, there were a lot of parts of it that kind of sucked. We were all running around ragged, and we felt as though there was never enough time to do anything. But at least I felt there's some semblance of control. So we could go back to the way things were, or we could imagine a different system that that takes our needs as people into account, that takes our children's needs related to their learning and our needs as parents, and meets those needs rather than us having to meet the needs of an inflexible system. And in my opinion, the distance between those two scenarios is smaller now than it ever has been before, and the effort that it would take to go to a different and better system is, compared to where we are now, is smaller than it has ever been before. But it relies on us seeing a different way, and my sincere hope is that pandemic pods and structures like it, some of them will fail, some of them will go up in flames, some of them will be amazing successes, and maybe as a society we can say, okay, that wasn't good, we don't want to repeat that, but this part worked really well, and let's adjust it in this way, and it'll work better for these children too. And that we could reimagine what learning could look like, so that it isn't this influx everybody has to adhere to.
So yeah, it's a little bit like greenhouse gases and the environment, and the fact that the one thing we've always wanted to do is to kind of clean up the atmosphere, but we can't do it overnight because there's just, the world is what it is. And then overnight the world changed, and we really did do that, and we experienced that. And I guess it's that kind of, if enough people realise that we can do it, we can change it. And the whole education system idea, if enough parents decide that actually what we really want to do is we want our education system to be better, and we know how we can do it, that's the biggest thing, and they can do it in their own way and get support in their own way, then it's really the volume of people that maybe start to steer that direction in that kind of way.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. I think the greenhouse gases, I think what I read was that our production decreased by, was it 7 to 10% or something? So somehow just stopping the world didn't necessarily make it drop as much as we might have hoped. But yes, I think the analogy still holds, that we always thought that we couldn't change, and now we have been forced to change, and we get to either go back or choose something different. I think the real issue is that we are so primed to need safety, to feel like, oh yeah, I know what that is. I know what school is. I can organize my life around school. I've done that before. It feels familiar. It feels safe, even though it didn't necessarily work very well for my family. And I think that the real danger is if we don't engage in some kind of reflection, some kind of conversation about what it is that we want, then we will gravitate back towards what we had, because in a way it's almost already happening with things opening up piecemeal here and there, and when that happens, it's just sort of, oh yeah, schools open here, okay, when is it going to be open there, okay, yeah, schools open everywhere, oh, we're back in school is school still. Whereas if we take some time and reflect on what could learning look like, I work a lot with parents who want to support their child's intrinsic love of learning, and who are kind of, their kids are in school and they find themselves in this weird place where school is kind of teaching them one thing about grades and achievement and gold stars and all the rest of it. And the parents like, but wait, I want my kid to love learning for the sake of learning, not because they got a gold star or an A. And so what if those two things could just work together and intrinsically support a child's love of learning? And that world is possible. And my belief and my hope is that things like pandemic pods and structures like it can give us examples that we need to point to and say, yeah, I want more of that. So that we're not just trying to imagine this theoretical thing, but this practical thing that actually happened, and then we can actually take steps to make that happen in real life for many more children.
Yeah, and I think that really is the key factor, because I've had a few conversations about this. We're hoping that somebody somewhere will see the change and think, fantastic, let's go with this. Except we know that isn't the case. It's that sort of ground up kind of thing which often makes the difference. And I think, like you said, the experience of what a pandemic pod looks like, how it works, the way these things are, being able to say, look, we've already got it in some form or another, let's run with this, is the way that can change. And I think that's the key factor, rather than just the talking about it, is the fact we've got some of that practical experience, even if it's in its infancy or even if it morphs in some way, there is a structure there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's think about what this year is going to look like, because we don't know. I guess that's the one thing we do know, is that we don't know. So what would you say the priorities should be? I mean, we talked about the fact of this idea of being behind and all of that, but what should we be focusing on in terms of what we can get out of life during this time, and how we can support our children to do that?
Yeah. The most important things that I see our children coming out of this period with is a sense of connection with people around them who love them, and a sense of safety. And for some children, this is easier than others. There are children, obviously, who are in very difficult circumstances where the family that they're living in is not the place that they find connection and not the place that they find safety. And that we need to have structures in place to support those children. That could be through school, that can be through other organizations, but to make sure that they also feel the benefits of this. For those of us who are in relatively privileged positions, who have a home over our heads, who are able to support our children financially, and sort of we have our basic needs taken care of, it is so tempting to think, oh, well, my child's going to get behind. How are they ever going to make it up? There's so much competition in the world for elite university places and for elite jobs. And if they fall behind now, how are they ever going to make it up? When actually the thing that our children need more than ever right now is a sense of connection with us, and is a sense that we are their safe space. That even when the world seems like it's in turmoil, and the reality is the world was always changing before, that there's the one constant, isn't it? Even though it seems as though it's changing now more than ever, it was always changing. There were always things in each of our lives that we would think, oh, if I can just get through this next thing, everything will be good. And then something else pops up and something else pops up. And but if we can kind of see life for what it is, and that it is a thing that constantly changes, and kind of accept that, I guess, and get comfortable with that, and just say, yeah, this is what it is now, and in a way it's hard, and there are aspects of this that suck, and there are aspects of this that also are kind of cool, and to really kind of just be in it, to just experience it for what it is, and to help our children to learn how to do that too, and to not be always kind of grasping at this elusive sense of, oh, well, if I have a sense of control, then everything will be better. When this thing happens, everything will be better. But instead, to help our children to learn how to just be here, to not always do, but to just be, and have that be okay. And to find a real sense of safety there, and to know that we are there for them no matter what happens. I mean, to me, that's the most profound thing that can come out of this particular period of time.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I think connection's such a perfect word in this scenario, because it's what it should be anyway. It's the most important thing about your connection, obviously with your family, but your connection with yourself and your connection with the world around you in whichever form that takes. And I think understanding that then gives you the safety that you need, because you know inherently that it's okay, because that's how the world works at its most basic level. And then you start to realize that education, whatever that looks like, you know, in school, pandemic pods or whatever, is a tool. It's a joyous thing to be curious about and to learn to enhance your version of the world going forward, or your child's version of the world going forward. And I think that then suddenly feels like there's a weight taken off and takes the pressure off, because I certainly know I've learned a lot more since I've left school than I probably did while I was there. And when you kind of feel like that's possible, then you think, oh, okay, then very difficult when you're going through it, I know. And it seems very simple, just sort of chatting in that way. But I think that sense of, like you say, being in the now, being connected to everybody and everything, and most importantly yourself, and knowing that, and then going forward, I think that will change the world for everyone individually, and I think it will change the world externally in terms of the society that we live in. So what a great way to finish this conversation and kind of hopefully have a bit of a positive slant on the whole thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Jen, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights and your wisdom on all of this. And like I say, I know you've got some stuff on your website about it, so please direct people to where they can find out much more.
Yeah, so I have a podcast as well. It's called Your Parenting Mojo, and through that, I also have a couple of memberships. One is called Finding Your Parenting Mojo, and that really helps parents to bring about shifts in their family life towards a more connected and cooperative environment when it feels as though everything just is getting on top of you on the parenting side. And then I also have a membership called Your Child's Learning Mojo, which really is together they form the complete support package for your child. So on the learning side, we're looking at an intrinsic love of learning. You know, how do we support that either in a homeschool environment or in an environment where they're in school and you want to supplement on evenings and weekends? And how do we really understand how children learn and nurture that without being what we think of as kind of the sage on the stage? You know, how do I teach them everything they need to know, but instead transition to being the guide on the side who connects them to resources and really helps them to take the lead in their own learning, so they will love to learn for the sake of learning. And then, of course, the Pandemic Pods course and a variety of other stuff as well. But you can find all that stuff at yourparentingmojo.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks so much for everything that you're doing, because I think it's so important, and I think these conversations are important. But I think people like yourself who are then going that extra mile to create the podcast, to create the courses, which are then able to help so many people directly, is incredible. So best of luck with the rest of your quarantine, and I hope the time you manage to get with your family is everything that you want to from now on in.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk with you again, Mark.
Thanks for listening to the Education on Fire podcast. For more information of each episode and to get in touch, go to educationonfire.com. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. I'd like to thank the National Association for Primary Education for their continued support and sponsorship of this show. NAPE are currently supporting teachers by producing fortnightly videos which cover themes like art, school trips and literacy. Also, they are giving away e-copies of their professionally produced journal, Primary First. To find out more about the association, please go to nape.org.uk. That's nape.org.uk.